So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the high-level expert webinar on digital commons and digital sovereignty that we will have today. This webinar has been organized within the context of the Next Generation Internet Initiative, that is a European Commission initiative that strives to ensure the creation of an open, trustworthy, secure, and sustainable internet. My name is Monique Calisti. I'm the director of the Next Generation Internet Outreach Office, and we've helped the Commission to organize this afternoon together, I hope, with many of you, and together with high-level experts that will tell us more about digital commons initiatives across Europe and policy-driven efforts in the direction of ensuring digital sovereignty for Europe and for all European citizens. Before I give the floor to our first speakers, I would like to remind a couple of things for all the participants. Well, first of all, if you can keep your microphone on mute and turn off the camera would be good. And whenever there are questions, please drop them in the chat. We will keep them and make sure that they are part of our discussions. Also, raise your hand in case you want to add any comment. Also, please be aware that the webinar is being recorded. So if you have any problems with that, it's time to say goodbye, I'm afraid. I hope that you will stay with us and also that you will help us sharing the messages, the information that we learned today via your social media channels. We have a Twitter account. We have also other channels that we will animate today. And we recommend you to use NGI Digital Commons as hashtag to refer to the discussions of today. Now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome on stage Gemma Carolillo. Gemma Carolillo is the Deputy Head of Unit of the Next Generation Internet Unit at the European Commission, and she will give her an insight in what the NGI is and what is our current focus and forward-looking perspective also at policy-driven level. Gemma, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. So I am the pleasure to be the first speaker among many distinguished speakers today, and my role here will be to bridge the topics that concern specifically the Next Generation Internet Initiative, and which is our, I would say, butter and bread in the team at the European Commission, with the digital commons, which is a concept which is now entering more and more policies at the national level in the European Union, at the union level, but also at the global level, including at the UN, where digital commons is one of the topics that is being included among the big consultation on the future. It's called the Global Digital Compact. So this is the topic which is hot from the point of view of the interest of policymakers a bit around the world. So next slide, please. So what we are going to see now is there are conceptualization first, very briefly, around the digital commons. And I will try then to bridge how the concept of digital commons has been addressed in the past year at the level of the member states and the Commission, and specifically what the European Commission is planning to do. Regarding the concept of digital commons, it's of course known what commons mean, which are shared resources that are usually created, owned or shared inside the community that is responsible for that. Digital commons are, of course, nothing too far from this concept, but we're talking about usually information and knowledge resources that are created collectively and owned or shared among a community. You find here on screen a definition which is coming from the presidency of the Council of the European Union from last year by the French presidency, which called for a European initiative on digital commons. But the important concept, whatever definition is taken of digital commons, is that there is a strong community element, that there is a strong decentralization element. So inside a community, it's important that the contribution and the governance are distributed, are not centralized in the hands of one or a few entities only. So with this precondition, we can say that most or a lot of the open source software, hardware standards, but the open data as well, can be included in this definition. Next. One important element of the digital commons, we say this, that they are non-exclusive, so that they are meant to be used and used and not exchanged. So there are at least three major aspects that make the digital commons a very important topic at the moment. The angle of the sovereignty, the angle of the trust, and of course, from the European perspective, the European values. Recently, at the end of 2022, the European Union has adopted what is called the Declaration on the Digital Principles and Rights. This is a sort of our commitment from the European Union to digital transformation that is based on a specific set of values. So having the same rights online or offline, having a privacy-preserving approach to the digital technology, having the users in control of their data, and having users empowered overall in the digital sphere. So this is, of course, just a small set of the principles that are in the declaration. And if we take a look at the digital commons perspective, which is the one precisely of shared resources, privacy preserving, with the user control, the issue of portability of the data, we see that there is really a strong resonance with this European agenda. Also, the issue of sovereignty can be seen from at least two perspectives. So the perspective from the governments, the perspective from regions of the world. So to have technology developed according to their own vision for the digital transformation, to have the possibility to avoid, as far as possible, dependency, so there is no lock-in in terms of vendors, and to have access to affordable systems that can be improved constantly based on the work of the community. And of course, this bottom-up idea, which is present in all open source tradition, which is the innovation without permission. So the need to preserve this space as not strictly regulated can contribute to the narrative of sovereignty. If you develop a system which is close to the values we are talking about. And there is the sovereignty, of course, from the user. So I'm not repeating myself, but we are talking about empowerment and control, in particular about the data. And for what concerns the trust, of course, something which is transparent is usually seen as trustworthy because there is a possibility to see what is behind these information knowledge resources. And also there is no central control. So decentralization, again, calls for a shared government and for user empowerment. In the European Union, we are going to talk today about NGI, which is a funding program. But beyond what I mentioned about the Declaration of Digital Principles and Rights, there is a series of initiatives, including legislative ones, that are in line completely with this approach. So if we are going to talk today in the panel, I think also about open data and the data commons. So the legislation that the European Union is enacting or has already enacted in terms of data is all contributing to the creations of data commons. So just to mention a few, the Open Data Directive, which stimulated open government data and open access for research data, the Data Governance Act, which is goes more into the direction the trust narrative, so reinforce the trust in data sharing, and the latest legislation, which is now still under negotiations, which is the Data Act, which really looks at the data as a resource which needs to, whose value needs to be capitalized in a way by those who are producing this data, so the users. And there are more. So there is now the open source observatory from the European Commission, which works as a single information point for open source initiatives. But my point in this is that what is something that is considered traditionally coming from the bottom-up perspective, so the open source environment, is very much in line with the top-down approach, policy approach regarding the vision for the digital transformation, and including with the issues like the digital sovereignty, which is usually seen as government-only concepts. Next slide, please. Regarding the reason why digital commons are important beyond the policies that I just described, is that there is a need to, in particular for the policymaker, to look closer at the fact that the digital commons are already everywhere. If we take a broad definition of digital commons, which is what I attempted before, and in particular looking at internet technologies, I mean, the biggest part of the internet infrastructure and servers are powered by digital commons, and including the DNS technology, but also the Linux operating system, emails. So this is a very important element to knowledge. So the commons are everywhere. And then there is the perspective linked to the security. So first of all, digital commons can be considered a pillar of cybersecurity, since there are several of such resources that are used to detect software vulnerabilities. But at the same time, they are critical to cybersecurity because they can be a source of vulnerability themselves. And it's very important that there is security scrutiny on such resources. And indeed, there is the example of the US, which has launched important projects last year in 2022, precisely to devise stronger security of some of the digital commons, considering that a very small piece, in a way, of software can be used in very critical applications, and it can be very critical to the use of these applications. There are other perspectives. Very briefly, I will touch upon the economic and the geopolitical perspective, which make digital commons important and interesting in a way. Next, please. So if you look at the economic perspective, we had a couple of years ago in the European Commission a study. There are others on the table. Of course, I'm referring to one we procured, which looked at impact of the open source in terms of economic growth. And the study has predicted, you see it on screen, that an increase of 10% in contributions to open source software code could generate an interesting increase from 0.4 to 0.6 of the GDP. And not to mention many additional ICT startups in the EU. So it is potentially a source of increased economic competitiveness. So important to look at. And from the geopolitical perspective, so as I said, the commons can be a tool for sovereignty. And there is a fine line, of course, in between the desire from governmental organizations to invest in, for example, in open source, because it's a pragmatic approach. You can see that you could have good solutions that can be constantly improved at hand and be designed also according to specific needs. There is no vendor lock-in, but at the same time, it can be also considered as a tool for increased sovereignty, which is also a very political concept, as I said, and it's not always seen as positive in relation to the global open digital world, and in particular the global internet. But the other element from the geopolitical perspective is that we are talking from a region, the European Union and Europe, where there are a lot of innovators and developers that contribute to bring to the community digital commons. We have many contributors, but we don't have critical mass in terms of structure. So today, less than 15% of all the foundations are in the European Union or in Europe, we can say, while we have a lot of contributors. Foundations are important, of course, because they can help the sustainability. So commons have a life cycle, like all resources. So it's important to support the creation, the maintenance, the growth. But for the long-term sustainability, it's clear that the foundations have had so far an important role, and we do not have a lot of this in the European Union. So this is something to be considered. Next, please. So for all these reflections and more contributed to a debate in the European Union, starting in the member states. And there has been a discussion last year launched by the French presidency of the Union. We are lucky today to have a representative from a member state, Nele Leosk, that will give more insights on this. And the member states discussed in a working group the possibility to devise a strategic approach to digital commons. There was a group composed by 17 countries, and they delivered a very interesting report, which I invite you to read if you are interested in the subject, that was presented at the Digital Assembly last year in 2022. So what is in this report? Next, please. There has been overall an emphasis in the report for a strong commitment from the European Union to support the digital commons and to steer the effort that already exists towards these strategic resources. So there are efforts at the national levels, there are some efforts from the Commission. One bottom line was the need for coordination. And the group presented, I would say, an interesting mapping of what is on the table already at the moment, and delivered a series of conclusions. In particular, some of these, of course, I'm referring to a report from last year, and the group has continued, to my knowledge, working, so we can expect more coming from the member states. So there were, among the possibilities, there was the idea of establishing a one-stop shop. So as we said, we need to create critical mass. So having a common platform that would support the national EU players to find funding opportunities, and also for the policymakers to identify the areas they need support. There was also an idea to launch a common call for proposals from the member states, again, to achieve critical mass at the EU level. And longer term, the idea to look at an EU foundations, because as I said before, foundations proved critical in ensuring sustainability of digital commons. The bottom line of the report is that governments, starting with themselves, need to reflect on a policy commons first, meaning the public sector should assess open source or open data solutions before turning into different type of solutions. Also, not only to set the examples, but to start changing the habits in the public sector. Now, this is what has happened at the level of the member states, and we'll hear more later. But what have we've been doing in the European Commission. So in NGI, the Next Generation Internet Initiative, this is positioned, next slide, please. This is positioned in, you see on screen an attempt of classifying the concepts. So not all of the open source can be called digital commons. We say the good portion surely can be called digital commons if the conditions of governance are respected. The next generation internet is what you see at the very inner circle. So it's an initiative powering open internet software and hardware commons, what we call the internet commons. And of course, it has a lot in common with digital commons philosophy itself. It can be considered a subset, and it has in common overall anyway with all open source ecosystem and with the digital commons, the open design that characterizes both areas. NGI is a program. It's something which we started 4 years ago with the first projects, started with the vision even longer than that. And it really matches, in a way, the specificities of the commoners, because it adopts a bottom-up approach, low red tape, and we try to invest in agile projects composed really by focused teams working on finding solutions for specific problems in the internet arena. Next, please. So NGI is pursuing this vision of creating the internet of humans. The values that I was recapping before regarding the overall EU approach to the digital transformation are exactly the same. So there is full coherence that hopefully does not come as a surprise. So we pursue the values of an open internet, which is privacy preserving, decentralized, that gives high opportunity for inclusion, and that, of course, now invests more and more in the topic of sustainability. But how we do it, so how we try to deliver these building blocks for the Internet of Humans, is by powering these, as I said, open source software and hardware solutions which cut across really all the layers of the internet. And we try to do it with a system which really cuts on the red tape and ensures that the funding is provided to those who are really working on the key components of the internet and that are not necessarily reached by the usual European Union funding schemes. Next, please. What we have done so far, I will be very quickly because I want to tell you what we are going to do next. We have had an investment under the previous programming funding program, apologies, Horizon 2020, and we have a renewed investment for 7 years now under Horizon Europe. We have now catalog of more than 700 projects with associated solutions that really cover all layers of the internet. I invite you to look on the NGI website to the so-called catalog where you find the solutions and the innovators that deliver those solutions. And this has covered, as I said, all layers of the internet, and on a wide range of topics, from privacy preserving technology to blockchain, technologies for search and discovery. There is really a wide variety of solutions that many of them are already available, functioning, and ready to be used. So what we are going to do in the next phase, and this is happening already this year. Next slide, please. So we are trying now, having kind of concluded the first phase for an NGI, we are trying to have now a program revolved around 3 main priorities. First of all, structuring the ecosystem of NGIers, as we call them, meaning the innovators that work according to this vision of the human-centered internet, piloting the existing solutions in key sectors, and then support the mapping of the existing and emerging commons in the field of the internet, so what we call the internet commons, and see how we can devise a plan to ensure that they go into sustainability. Now, there is this is part of the current Horizon Europe work program. We have calls that are open until the end of March. You find all details on the NGI website, and there is an important funding element associated to that. So the part related to the structuring of the ecosystem is following the life cycle approach of the commons that I mentioned before. So looking both at the creation of new commons, bringing them to maturity, and the growth of the internet commons. The second part regarding the piloting is test a current commons developed under NGI into key sectors. And of course, we are looking really at big variety of sectors: public services, healthcare, supply chain management. There is quite a wide range of options. And then, as I said, we have what we call a support action, which is specifically looking at developing the next steps for the internet commons under NGI. I haven't mentioned, and I will not go into the details, we have an action on international collaboration, which is also very important, but it's, I would say, less relevant in the context of today's webinar. So I will conclude and we go to the next and the last slide, that what I tried to summarize regarding the national initiatives, the narratives that emerge at the national levels. The EU narrative, I also refer to the global stage with the UN consultation on the global digital commons, and the funding opportunities that are already on the table from the European Commission with NGI, but there are also national initiatives like the German Sovereign Tech Fund and efforts that are developing at the global level, that there is now a momentum, and it's now most likely the moment where the path for the future, and also how Europe will position itself into the global arena regarding the digital commons. Probably the momentum is such that the new path can be started as of today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to Monique.
Thanks a lot, Gemma. Without any further, so it was a very dense presentation with a lot of information. The presentation will be made available, and also we're trying to share the links of some of these initiatives, and also of the open calls. So besides the Horizon Europe calls, there are also ongoing open calls for innovators within the area of NGI. We're sharing those links via the chat. Now, if you agree, Gemma, I would give the floor to Nele. Nele is the Ambassador at Large for Digital Affairs of Estonia, and we have the pleasure to have her with us to report on the several initiatives that she has been pushing forward within your countries and also at European level. So Nele, welcome on stage. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Gemma, for this very great overview. I think I would have to also get you here to Estonia to explain everything this to my colleagues and everybody that we work with. But before I start, I would just like to mention that I've been following the chat, that I have been immensely enjoying, because I was definitely anticipating it, and I was also wondering myself, what should I use as a tool for my presentation? But representing Estonian government, I have an easy way out and actually use the Estonian government presentation as a background. So, which I'm afraid does not actually support our current topic here. But without taking any more of your time, I would simply like to say that a bit about my background. So I'm currently in the Foreign Office and have been working here for 2.5 years. But prior to that, I was involved in digitalization in very different sectors, in the private sector, in the government, but also advising several governments around the world. And when I took my office or this position around 2.5 years ago, I was, during my first or second week, invited to a meeting on digital public infrastructure. And I was wondering, what is this? I was doing a little bit of Googling and maybe 10-15 minutes to the meeting, I understood that actually what we were talking about was nothing new, even though I completely agree with Gemma that digital commons, as we refer to in the EU, and that does refer to, let's say, a broader context, but when we look at the global sphere, and I will mostly talk about Estonia, that is what I am representing, but also my work at the multilateral cooperation formats and networks, we can definitely see, I would say, a rising trend. And as Gemma also ended her presentation, I believe there is actually a momentum to push for these very essential principles of digitalization that have been around for 20-30 years, at least the time that I have been in digital transformation, but perhaps have not kicked off for one or the other region across the globe. So I would kindly ask to go to the next slide. But in the first slide, I guess you saw the comments that we can also offer you here in Estonia, apart from the digital commons. So I'm not going to the definitions as I think Gemma very nicely summarized it, but some things I would like to point out. As I was also saying, that we have different terms being used across the globe, and there are some differences into these, but at times these terms are also actually used simultaneously, and one of them is definitely digital public infrastructure, and I would say that this is closest to the commons. That does not only include digital public goods, which takes perhaps this very solutions-based approach to digital commons, but it also includes the sort of the ecosystem around it, what it takes or what you need for, let's say, the digital public goods to flourish. And increasingly, we hear a lot of different GovTech initiatives. Some of them frame them also as the digital commons initiatives or digital public goods, but not necessarily it is actually so. And later I will bring you some examples of some global initiatives and perhaps movements that do frame themselves as let's say, digital commons or digital public infrastructure initiatives, but are not necessarily, I would say, fully in line with the principles that it promotes. But as I said, when I sort of encountered with this increasingly popular term, I came to realize that it's something that we have actually promoted and followed in Estonia since, I would say, the beginning of digitalization. And this is actually, of course, historic reasons. And I would go to the next. Yep. So we here take a bit larger approach, and I would say even larger approach to digital commons than perhaps Gemma was referring to. And we mainly actually see, I would say that this is how it all started in Estonia, that has become sort of one reference countries to digital commons or digital public infrastructure. And this is actually related to democracy. And in our case, really to the development of a country that would be very different from a context where we were before 1991 when we regained our independence. So we really had to rethink the role of the government in our society, and the very first principles of what we nowadays call commons or public infrastructure were actually put down in 1998 when we adopted our first information society principles that really put down essential principles for how we saw our government. And Gemma also referred to,
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like
somebody's having more fun than me.
Sorry, Nele, we will mute all and we will reopen the mic for you because someone is speaking. Katerina, can you take care of that?
We do it, you know, like.
No problems at all. So it started actually with openness of government and government processes, and this mindset that everything that the government does, first of all, it does not do for itself, and second, it does not do it by itself. So the first steps were taken towards public information, access to public information, reuse. I think then the open data movement started, and I would say continuously it's then moved to open solutions, open systems, and open code. So by now, all the public developments in Estonia need to be open. Whether they are made public, of course, is another issue. Not everything is public. But I checked our GitHub or sort of our open code repository this morning, just in case to be sure that I know exactly what is happening there. And I saw around 180 different solutions, but we are moving towards, I would say, process-based approach to our open code repository. So anybody who is interested, I can later send the link and you can check it out. But I would also like to add, next slide, a bit on why. Gemma mentioned the most important things, and I'm not going to repeat. I may not perhaps share the enthusiasm in all the aspects around sovereignty, because there is a limited amount that the Digital Commons can do, but it does have a role also in Estonia, where we have the requirement for open code, and this is mainly to avoid the situation where really the government does not have a control over its digital developments, and also has, let's say, the freedom to let's say a bit easier change the providers, even though we know that actually also open source can lead to vendor lock-in, because governments do need partners to implement their projects, whether they are then open source or not. But there is one aspect that I would definitely like to emphasize, and this is a bit related to the mindsets that I was referring to before, and that is really the mindset of openness and sharing. And this has been very crucial for Estonia, because over the past years, we have not had enough, and especially in the 90s, we did not have enough resources in our government, but also in our private sector, to develop certain solutions separately or individually. And we see that still increasingly taking place all over the world, that solutions that we all need, either government organizations or private sector, are still being procured separately. And I will bring later some examples from Estonia, but one of these examples, for example, is an digital identity, because it's obvious that in order to provide services, either private or public, people need to authenticate themselves. So around 2000, we realized that it's much better for us actually to pool our resources across private and public sector. And that is also the reason how Estonia started to implement single national digital identity across the nation, across the sectors. And we are very much looking forward also to have these kind of approaches to our digital developments cross borders. And I will bring some examples what Estonia already does with its closest neighbor, Finland, and also Iceland, but definitely something that I believe that we should take more seriously in the European Union, especially considering that we all lack resources. And here I'm mainly referring to the skill set that we need. But ultimately, it is actually not about technology. So when we see digital commons or digital public infrastructure, let's say, put into this geopolitical context, it obviously has become a big part of, let's say, digital cooperation or development cooperation agenda. Gemma mentioned the United Nations, the Tech Envoys process, the Global Digital Compact that I will also refer to later. But and there, the sort of, I would say, the new selling argument is that, okay, these commercial solutions have not worked, or these commercial solutions bring you some dependencies that you may not want to have, either from the big tech or from some states. But it is actually not about the solutions. Of course, some countries have more money, they will buy fancier solutions. Some countries have less money, they don't buy as fancy solutions. But what makes it actually work is everything that you build around it. Gemma was referring to institutional framework, but there are organizational frameworks and so forth. So as with any technology, it takes around 10–15% the technology and the rest what you do with that technology. So I believe that we need to keep this also in mind and perhaps not also oversell this new concept as a new remedy for all the problems that we have not managed to solve in the past years. But next slide, please. And I'm going to go through the next slides quickly. I think we can go through this one. This is a digital identity example that I was referring to before, that is basically a solution that is a government sort of responsibility, but the entire, I would say, society benefits from it, as it's also used by private sector for their services. And the next slide, I am sure that you all know or have heard, but this is actually a very important part of Estonia's, I would say, digital architecture is our data interoperability layer. So this solution, and this is open source and available for everybody for use and has been very popular around the world. In some cases it has succeeded, in some not, which again shows that it's actually not about the technology. But this is another example where we realize that different government organizations have similar needs, and the solutions don't have to be different, but perhaps there is one solution, and in this case, the X-roads that different organizations can use. It's also, of course, used to exchange data between private sector, because in order to provide good services to people, you need also data exchange between government and the private sector. So it is a solution that is centrally managed by the government in order to guarantee that this important part is secure, up to date, and so forth. But around 2013-14, we realized in Estonia that actually we need that kind of an tool also for cross-border services and cross-border data exchange. And next slide, please. And in 2016, we established a foundation together with Finland. It's called Nordic Institute of Interoperability Solutions. And that is actually a foundation not only founded, but it's also funded by Estonian and Finnish government, by now also Iceland and Faroe Islands. And that institution is in a way responsible for management of open source solutions that are needed for cross-border services. One of them is the X-Roads that I mentioned, but they have some other ones. And I think this is a good, and I would say very much needed mechanisms for digital commons to flourish, because not a single government can afford starting implementing or adopting digital solution that they cannot be sure of. So there needs to be some kind of a sustainability mechanism that gives a guarantee that once I start implementing a solution, it will be there. And here it comes again back to sharing resources. By now, we have more contributors, or let's say the X-Road community is bigger in Finland by now than it is in Estonia. And it is one of the reasons for that kind of cross-border collaboration. And Gemma was mentioning the digital commons. We are thinking something like around the digital commons report, I would say, actions or the post-phase report actions, really to see how we can not only promote but also sustain the solutions that we have been developing. And I would have next slide. And I think my time is starting to come over, so I will actually skip the next two slides. That were other examples of some of the things that we are doing here in Estonia. All our AI solutions are also open and shareable. And there are some challenges actually that come along also with our AI solutions. And this is actually related to the learning and how really to integrate this learning process across government to make these AI solutions work better. But this is already, I believe, a different story for a different session. But I would, with the remaining few minutes, actually like to draw attention to some of the global initiatives that promote, let's say, the development of an open, shareable, inclusive, interoperable, and all these nice words. And I would take, I would say, the next and then the next, so we can skip one slide. And now I'm coming to what I am mainly doing in my everyday life. So Gemma was mentioning the UN Tech Envoiced Global Digital Compact process that I have in my next slide. But before that, I would actually like to draw attention to the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And I believe they have quite a big role in taking this topic to global arena. It comes also from the Secretary General's high-level process on digitalization. It's one of its 8 components, and it is led by Norway, I believe UNICEF, and Sierra Leone and Esprit, which is an Indian think tank. And India is definitely one of the countries that has taken digital public infrastructure and digital public goods very high in their agenda, and I will also come to this in a second. So I would definitely check this out. They collect available solutions. So in this sense, they are quite solutions-based, and of course they are targeting at the development cooperation world. So they work quite a bit in Africa and many other countries, but not that much in Europe. We'll have the next slide, please. And the next one, because the Global Digital Compact was already mentioned. And I would like to say a few words about GovStack initiative that was also mentioned today. It's an initiative that was actually started by Estonian government, Germany, ITU, and DIAL. And I personally like this initiative, not only because we are co-initiated, but it's really a cool initiative. Because on the one hand, it's a geopolitical initiative, really not only to talk about these principles of openness and so forth, but really to provide to countries some solutions that would then help to build these democratic societies. So what GovStack does, that it gathers this 20+ years of digitalization experience from different countries and from different sectors. And what it does, it has this second aspect of innovation, or let's say innovative approach to digitalization, where it has sort of divided digitalization into different components. Some Estonian architects say that it takes around 2,000 components to build a digital government. We are definitely not there with GovStack, but we have started with some components where we have developed specifications, both technological, so what could be these functionalities be, but also what I would say perhaps implementation specifications, so what it really takes to make these things work. And one of the easiest examples is, of course, is again digital identity, or I would say data sharing, or some finance solutions, registries, and so forth. And next slide, please. We are currently in the process of GovStack to discussing whether we would also have some reference products, but we have not yet gone there, because we don't want to get this burden also of starting to assess all these different solutions that are there in the world. And my last slide actually is about G20. I mentioned India is a very big player in digital public infrastructure and is also having the G20 presidency this year. And they have technological development and digital cooperation as one of their, I would say, core priorities. And these are tackled both on the finance track, of course, of the finance ministries, but also Sherpa track, which is a track led by the foreign ministry, but also Think 20. And over there, they have different working groups that tackle it. But the aim of the presidency is actually to come up with a new digital cooperation model, which they frame digital public infrastructure. And I am putting it in very simple terms that in a way, it is a pony, like trying to oppose the dominant other two models that we are currently facing in the world. One controlled, let's say, by the big tech companies, and I think this is related again to the sovereignty, that we wouldn't be, let's say, hooked in some of the private sector players. And the other one is the big state model, and I think this more relates, let's say, to increasingly China's influence and of course in developing countries and especially in infrastructure projects in Africa. So this new model is actually promoting the same principles that we have been talking here today, is the commons, is the public infrastructure, where in a way you would avoid these dependencies that you don't want to have, and you develop really a democratic society where everybody can benefit from, and that is in a way, let's say, created together. So I definitely think that this is a big moment for everybody, but definitely something that we in the European Union should also be involved with, as I'm sure we also are. So I will end here. I believe I took a bit more time, and I actually end with a slide. Oh, it was already put, but I end with a slide from my own neighborhood and with a message that from at least from Estonian and I would say in the European perspective, we need to see digital commons as a way to build our digital societies together. So thank you so much. Thank you very much,
Nele. Here we go with the neighbor picture. Thank you, Katarina, for putting it up. I think it's good we took a little bit more time because you have made very concrete examples, and in this respect, I think there's a lot of food for thoughts. There was a question on that I guess was addressed to both of you, Gemma and Nele, about any report produced by the EU discussing Commission's opinion strategy on digital commons. I think, Gemma, you put a couple of links in your slides and directions to some reports. Is it?
Yes, thank you, Monique. So I hope you can hear me.
Perfect.
Correctly. I am integrating with headset. So we do not have a Commission report on digital commons. The reports I referenced in the presentation is coming from working group from the member states. But in terms of, I would say, topics that are very close to that, the European Commission released in 2020 the European Commission strategy for open source, which is, as I said, not completely overlapping with the topic of digital commons, but it does provide an idea of where the Commission wants to go and how it wants to build in the open source environment. So this I can send the link in the chat for everybody's knowledge.
Great, thank you very much. I would like to now introduce the panelists without any further ado. They have been great, and thanks a lot for the speakers. Nele and Gemma, please stay with us because in the discussions there might be still aspects that touch more upon what you have just told us. I have here a great panel, and since they've been silently and patiently waiting for their turn, I would like to ask them to introduce themselves shortly, and also to introduce their initiatives in the area of digital commons. I'm very happy to have them with us today. It's going to be an excellent panel, and thanks a lot also to the people that are contributing to discussions with their comments. We have Paul Keller, Director of Open Future, Kasia Odrozek, Director of Mozilla Foundation, Melanie Dulong de Rosnay, Director of CNRS Center for Internet and Society in France. We have Laureen Van Breen, Director of WikiRate. So I would go in the order of the slide, giving the floor first to Paul, then to Kasia, then to Melanie, and finally to Laureen. Please drop questions because then we will start with the interactive discussions. Paul, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Monique, for putting this together. This has been excellent so far, and also thanks to Nele and Gemma for those presentations. I prepared a few slides as requested for the introduction. Let me see if that works by sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, so I'm from, as you mentioned, I'm from Open Future, which is a 2-year-old think tank. We operate from Amsterdam and Warsaw, and we generally deal with questions related to openness in the digital environment. And one of our key issues is this concept of digital public space that we're trying to promote and trying to develop policies that can contribute to that. And for us, so we're placing the discussion about digital commons very much in the context of this ambition to build digital public spaces in Europe. And for that, it's maybe helpful to quickly explain what we understand under digital public spaces. For us, digital public spaces are ecosystems that exist outside of the control of commercial entities that provide platform service currently, and that provide fora for public exchanges, information access, civic organization, communication of all sorts outside of this extractive logic. For us, digital public spaces need to be based on democratic values and based on public digital infrastructure that ensures this existence of this rights-based, society-centered alternative to the spaces that we all use and know currently. And this, as you will see, like a lot of overlap between this definition of digital public spaces and what the previous speakers and probably also the subsequent speakers will understand under digital commons. So how do digital commons fit into all of this? We really see this creation of digital public spaces here on the right side of the slide as a goal, and we see both this idea of public digital infrastructure and digital commons as a version of that as key enablers of this idea of the digital public space. And it's important for us that both of them are invested in, but like with the digital commons, it's really one key aspect of digital commons for us that they can be contributed to by the organizations that build this digital public space and that steward these shared resources in a non-exclusive way. And we see like really a multitude of potential contributors and stewards here. On the one side, civic initiatives, so civil society organizations, civic media organizations, but also commons projects, local associations, whatever you can think of. And on the other side, we think like there's an important contribution to be had from public institutions, be that things like cultural heritage institutions, but also public service broadcasters, and then the large number of educational institutions, public educational institutions active throughout the European Union, think universities, but also like other parts of the educational sector. And so digital commons for us is one central element here. The other element is public digital infrastructure, so services that are built in order that are built with a public logic first, so that's a logic that is not about extracting data and generating profit, but really like infrastructural logic. And I think at the current stage, the NGI project, for example, is making contributions to this. So digital commons, like I'm at the risk of repeating the definitions that previous speakers have used, I'll skip over this. I want to highlight what we think is really like an important inflection point in this discussion is the European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles for the Digital Decade that was also mentioned, I think, by Gemma in her presentation. And for us, like really key in here is this sort of like commitment to enable the participation in the digital public space, that there's a right to participation in the digital public space. And it is also key to observe that some of the mechanisms to build this digital public space in line with our ideas about this are also highlighted in this. So promoting interoperability, transparency, open technologies and standards as a way to further strengthen trust in technology as well, consumers' ability to make autonomous and informed choices. And I think this is sort of going forward very much like a mission that has been identified by the institutions of the European Union at the end of last year, and that we I think are here together to figure out ways how we can put this into reality. And if we put all of this on a timeline, or like an idealized timeline, if you will, it is from our perspective very much clear that the current European Commission, the current mandate of the European Parliament, this cycle has been very much focused on regulation, right? Like regulation, the excesses of the commercially driven technology environment that we found ourselves in. We all know these marquee regulatory projects, some of them, like the majority of them already completed, some of them, such as the AI Act, still under discussion, but probably on track to get wrapped up this year. So this Commission's period is very much on a regulatory framework for the digital space. And we would argue that this needs to be complemented in order to actually realize the potential of this regulatory framework by a focus on infrastructure during the next mandate. And maybe to some degree, this Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles from last December is sort of like the starting point, or the point where this discussion can slowly turn from regulation towards this focus of infrastructure. Obviously, this also goes alongside with an implementation of this regulatory framework. A lot of these bigger acts come into force this year. And then maybe looking forward to consolidate these ideas about public digital infrastructure under the next multi-annual framework that starts in 2027. I think I leave that here as an introduction and hand over back to you, Monique.
Thank you very much, Paul. If you can stop sharing the screen.
Yes.
Yep. So we have now, we give the floor now to Kasia. Kasia doesn't have slides, or she has slides?
I do. And
okay, will you share them, Kasia?
Exactly,
Perfect.
yes.
Here we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be part of this panel, and so I enjoyed listening to all the presentations so far and learning a little bit more about NGI and other initiatives. And my name is Kasia Odrozek. I'm the director of the Insights CMC research team at the Mozilla Foundation. And I wanted to give you a short introduction on Mozilla and our relation to digital commons. Please, for the next slide, please. Mozilla, as you might know, something moved there in the slides, but I think that's fine. Is an organization of a family of products on the market, but backed by a nonprofit, by the Mozilla Foundation. We are mostly known for the browser Firefox. That remains one of the world's most successful open source projects that anyone can contribute to, and we give also the option to the community to leverage the power of browser extensions to shape their own unique browsing experience. So openness has been the success ingredients kind of from the very beginning, and the core value of the Mozilla project. So to kind of relate to what Nele said in the beginning, the idea of digital commons is kind of the old concept in a new bottle, and I think looking at the history of Mozilla is a proof point in that. Next slide, please. When I see from the very beginning, just to remind you, the Mozilla project was created in 1998 with the release of the Netscape browser suite source code, and that was has been done with the intention to harness the creative power of thousands of programmers on the internet and fuel innovation in the browser market. And that actually happened back then. The first year, the community members started creating new features, enhancing feature, and also started to be more and more engaged in the management and planning of the project itself, starting to expand this mission. And people started to create a variety of browsers, development tools, and a range of other projects. And this, what I put here on the slide, is an advertisement in the New York Times that was published there in 2004. And the financing of this advertisement was financed with crowdsourced. It was crowd-financed by all the volunteers who contributed to the first release of Firefox. And you can see the black stuff on the left side. There are all the names of the people, of the volunteers who contributed to it. I think nicely exemplifies, the power of innovation and of the of what is possible with the digital commons mindset. And of course, 2004 was a different time, and things in the power dynamics on the market that has changed since then. But Mozilla is still guided by our mission and by our manifesto. Next slide, please. And I think we have 10 principles in our manifesto, but I wanted to just read out 3 of them that I think are especially relevant to our discussion today, and I kind of exemplify also the core values that should drive the thinking behind digital commons in the European Commission. The internet is a global public resource that must remain open and accessible. That's our mission. That's what we're driven by. Next slide, please. Security and privacy on the internet are fundamental and must not be optional. That's also one of the very important principles when we think about digital commons. And the next one, the effectiveness of the internet as a public resource depends upon interoperability, innovation, and decentralized participation worldwide. Next slide, please. And as I said, we developed technology as a kind of a tactics to make the internet open and accessible to all, but we also, the Mozilla Foundation, we fuel a movement for a healthier internet. And since a couple of years, we also kind of double down and focus on trustworthy AI. Thank you. And that focus on trustworthy AI brings me to the topic of data commons, because we think a lot about what makes AI trustworthy, and we find it as one when there is agency for individuals and communities, but also accountability for harms. We think about transparency, we think about fairness and bias, but also data, as with data being the kind of building block of data sets, of course, data sets fueling the artificial intelligence, something that is kind of taking over all of the infrastructure of the internet, one could say in some ways. And as I said, the way the data is governed and the way it could be governed in a way that is different to how it's governed by the big tech in a very closed garden ways, that's something that we see as a necessary building block towards a more trustworthy AI, when there is more agency for individuals, but also for communities, as data, especially in the AI context, is relational. The collective dimension of data is an aspect that needs to be considered. And we looked 2 years ago, my team started this research where we looked like what is actually out there, what are the alternatives to the way data can be governed, where people can have more agency, where communities can govern more agency around their data, where harms can be prevented, where there could be recourse. And one of the approaches that we identified, of course, that is known as the data commons, right? And this approach we define as the where data is pooled and shared as a common resource, and that approach can address power imbalances by democratizing access and availability of data. So I'm not saying anything new here, but however, in this, in general, and especially in the AI context, where such data pools can be used and for data sets and then integrated into AI development pipeline, there is a lot of considerations of how to do this right, and how to manage it responsibly regarding privacy and security, regarding consent, especially in cases when such data sets can be used for different purposes or unintended purposes, the right licensing, community rules, how to make sure the data is of high quality, is less biased, is inclusive, and of course, and last but not least, how to incentivize people to actually contribute to such data commons. Of course, another rising topic is also the open sourcing of AI models. That could also be managed by community. The recent release of Stable Diffusion is an example of that, and that requires a debate that is already happening to mitigate the risks that come with it. Next slide, please. That was just a short introduction of how we think and debate and research at the Mozilla Foundation, but we also do stuff. So we fund, we do grant making with our Data Futures Lab, and we also experiment ourselves with data donation, data crowdsourcing, and data governance, creating our own kind of forms of digital commons. So very quickly, just to go through them. Next slide, please. The Data Futures Lab was created around 1.5–2 years ago, and this is kind of our incubator for prototypes for companies, for organizations who want to experiment with these new ways to govern data, including digital and data commons. And this year, the cohort that will be announced by the end of this month is focused on organizations building technology platforms that mobilize communities to contribute their data for a shared benefit. We'll have these 4 organizations work with medical, mobility, social media, and broadband data that will be experimenting with building technological solutions around crowdsourcing data, around consent, and so on, about community rules, and also around how to incentivize people to donate data. Next slide, please. We also just recently released and gave access to a data set of Firefox telemetry that should enable researchers to explore signals of network outages around the world. The aim here was to release and create more transparency around so-called shutdowns around the world, and then finally to achieve more accountability for a more open and resilient internet for all. We released that data sets in a privacy-preserving way, completely stripped of IP data, and also we took out all of the kind of small villages data points. But I'm showing this to make another point, because that data set alone doesn't prove, like, for example, that a shutdown has happened, but combined with other data sources, it could. So kind of bringing together different data sources and the value of collaboration by creating this kind of pools is an important thing of achieving like a public good ambition as well. I think like I'm probably need to hurry up a little bit. Next slide, please. Maybe we can skip the next one if somebody's interested in the YouTube data sets, that I can talk to that. But just to very shortly talk about Common Voice. Common Voice is our open source initiative to make voice technology more inclusive. People can donate their voices to the open source data sets, and then technologists can take that data and to create new products around speech technology, speech recognition or text-to-speech. To date, we have collected 20,000 hours of speech over 90 languages, reaching from Kiswahili to Vietnamese. So that is, and we also experimenting with a way to create a governance for the language communities included in that bigger data set. Next slide, please. I think one important thing to mention here, and maybe we get to talk about it later, is the story connected to Common Voice is also the story of the Hiku Media from New Zealand, who created a data set of the indigenous language and they developed their own speech recognition technology very successfully. And then they were approached by commercial actors, bigger commercial actors, who wanted to buy them from them. And they said, wanted the data to be available. And they said no, because making that kind of vulnerable data or the historical data available under an open license would mean they would lose the kind of exclusivity on it. And they would predict that the commercial actors would start selling their own kind of technology back to them, which I think is an interesting tension in the debate around digital commons of how to protect this kind of legacy versus how to make more and more data available. And this Hiku Media is also a grantee of our Data Futures Lab. They're developing now a social license that would be more fit for purpose.
Thank you, Kasia. We need to really hurry up on. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now sorry, I lost track if it's if we go, yes, next we go on with Melanie. Melanie, you also have slides. I would really recommend if you can keep within the 5-6 minutes that we recommended, so that we have enough time also for some more interactive part. Of course, you know what you're showing, it's difficult to stop you because I learn everything from every slide and from every thing you say. So now we give the floor to Melanie. Melanie, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay, yes, your slide is on screen and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monique, for organizing this event and for having me as the academic of the webinar. So my name is Melanie Dulong de Rosnay, and I'm a researcher, and I'm also the co-founder and the director of the Center for Internet and Society at CNRS in France. Next slide, please. So what we're doing in our research center is studying the co-shaping between internet and the digital technologies and society, and what is the effect of technologies of user rights, and how technologies can embed social values. And my field is law and policy, and I've been studying since many years several cases of digital commons. So let's recall that digital commons exist since over 20 years if you count the first free and open source software. And my particular interest has been to define public policies, to define legal frameworks, to see what are the conditions of sustainability for these digital commons. So economic, but also social or legal sustainability, and also to define the scope of openness and of enclosure, which ones can be acceptable because they have a positive role for the commons, and which ones would be threats for the commons and for the society, because for instance, value would be extracted and would not be shared with the society, or would not be available for further building of more digital commons in a generative manners. So some case studies since these 2 decades, public sector information, as Paul recalled, cultural heritage, more recently infrastructure commons, peer production platforms, community networks in the realm of internet connectivity. Next slide, please. So based on all these case studies with my colleague Felix Stalder of the University of Zurich, we've been working on definition, which is systemic and action oriented, to know what supports digital commons. So the governance, as it was already mentioned, is hybrid, and there is a mutual influence, this co-shaping mechanism between the various features. So the legal regulation, the technical architecture, the social arrangements, participation, etc., and the economic models. Next slide, please. So in addition to the interdisciplinarity of these various features which interact and are completely necessary to build, develop, and have sustainable digital commons, there is also this collaboration between academia and civil society, governments, non-profits, companies, etc. And what has been the road in order to provide support for digital commons? So a bit of a backwards timeline. So what happened before the timeline presented by Paul Keller. So initially, coalition of digital commons advocates and producers and scholars were working to develop a favorable legal framework and try to reach institutional recognition. So there were licenses, there were policy recommendations and efforts to have organizations and legal frameworks recognize either open access or the public domain or the digital commons. So that was maybe the first decade. And then we've seen many successes with sectorial policies which really recognized and protected and enforced some protection measures for subsets of digital commons. So I'm taking the example of open science, and the European Commission has been a pioneer in mandating. So that's an example of cases where digital commons are not only voluntarily produced bottom up by communities who who are volunteering, but there's a top-down mandate. And so I think this is my last slide, and this is my last sentence. The most recent institutional efforts has been already presented at large by Gemma. So it's this digital commons strategy to provide sovereign digital infrastructure. So there has been this very interesting proposal a few years ago by Nelly, your French homologue, Henri Verdi and his team, to use digital commons as strategic tools for digital sovereignty. And I think it has been very productive, and I look forward to the development of these efforts. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Melanie. And now I would give the floor to Laureen. Thanks a lot for waiting patiently. And the floor is yours, Laureen.
Thank you, Monique. And yeah, well done to everyone who stayed around. It's been a lot of information, lots of food for thought. And I'll try to keep it short so we can also have a little bit of discussion still. But yeah, so I don't have slides. I've been on the road for 2 weeks by now, so it's been a little hectic, but I think my internet connection is stable, so hopefully you can hear me well. And yeah, if I'm dropping out or anything happens, feel free to pop stuff in the chat or yeah, just let me know and I can repeat myself. Yeah, so I'm the managing director at WikiRate. We are a small nonprofit based in Berlin. We've been around for about 10 years now, and really our mission is to make data about companies open and accessible and freely available for anyone to use. This is mostly data about the social and environmental performance of companies. There is a lot of information already quite easily available and accessible on financial performance of companies, but the challenges we face and the role we would envision the private sector to play in tackling those challenges are a lot more on the social and environmental side of things. So inequality, think of climate change, those kinds of big topics. So we work across the full spectrum of ESG. That doesn't make us an expert on all of those issue areas. We couldn't possibly be, but we work with a community of passionate individuals, advocates, NGOs, academia, investors. It goes across the full spectrum of stakeholders. And this community, we help when they need help, but they're generally self-organized, which also is why we are a wiki. So they bring in the data to the system, they collect the information, and they then analyze that information and publish things like reports about it, make a dashboard. Yeah, it's really anything that they think could have an impact and could really help improve decision-making on what companies should be doing. And I think one of the more exciting parts about our work is that we're not like a data provider like many of the other big commercial ones that are out there, like a Bloomberg or a Refinitiv. But what we do is we work with company data, so data that companies publish themselves, but we also work with data coming from other sources. And yeah, that I always kind of compare it to, you know, if I were to go to a job interview and I told you I was a great team player and I was great at sticking to deadlines, and I could give you some examples of that, that would be great as a first source, but you would still call my references, right? And the same goes for companies. If they tell us they're sustainable and they give us evidence of that, great, but it's just one source. We also want to hear, what do workers experience? What do the communities living near factories experience? And do they also consider their practices to be responsible and sustainable? So it's really about bringing all of those different voices together. So it's that kind of opening up of the ESG space and helping us get a more nuanced understanding of the impacts of companies, the real impacts of companies. Now, we are, as I said, not the expert on all of these different topics. We're the experts on the tech and the data side of it. So our tech is open source, all the data is open data, and that's also what we do our advocacy on. So most recently, we've been working with the EU a lot on this new law that is coming into force, where companies need to start reporting a lot more information than they previously have, and they're going to be doing so in an open data format. Now, yeah, it's the spirit is definitely there. The willingness of the EU is definitely there, but we're seeing that the people who are writing the laws and then need to translate that into the practicalities of it don't always understand these concepts, which, just like how we cannot understand all the ESG topics, we can't be an expert on that. Lawmakers can't be an expert on every single thing that they write laws about, right? So they are relying on the community of experts that are out there to help them do that well. So a lot of our work is just explaining what it means for it to be open data. How does it practically work? What are companies supposed to be doing? And it starts from, it just means that it's free and open for the usual users. And then we kind of have to explain things like, well, actually, there's going to be more users. There's going to be users that previously didn't have this information, like worker rights groups in production countries in Asia. And how are they going to be able to access this information? Can they? And are you making it easy for them to work with that information as well, so that they can advocate for things, for improvements in supply chains, for instance? So it's that kind of shifting that we're trying to, in mindset, that we're trying to help with as well. And this is actually, I think, one of the things that, is most exciting, also challenging, because when we talk about open source and we talk about open data, we are always saying it shouldn't be something you pay for, it's infrastructure, but the mindset is still very often that it is something that can be monetized. And if it isn't, then it must also be of low value. And so this is something we also often are trying to explain again and saying, it's just because something is free, that doesn't make it cheap or easy or of bad quality. And yeah, this is the kinds of conversations we have all the time. One other thing I thought would be worth mentioning, and then I'll stop because I want to make sure there's time for questions and discussion, is that one of the other things that we are really excited about that's coming up for us is that very often you hear talk from open data initiatives or open infrastructure or common digital commons that, conceptually it's all pieces of the same puzzle and everything is interoperable and we can connect. But rarely do you actually see those things connecting and then showing what the sum of all parts is. And so we are now mobilizing with a number of organizations working with open data on companies to say, okay, well, let's align our strategies and make sure that it's not, we're just all talking about different sectors, or we're just all talking about slightly different companies. So even though we can connect, there's no real point in connecting because we're working on different puzzles. So to strategically align and make sure we're working on the same puzzle, which is challenging because, as we were seeing in the chat as well, a lot of these groups are NGOs. And so if you're talking to a funder and you explain your open data, your companies, and you're all working on the same sector, they might think you're actually duplicating work rather than working together. And so we are looking at, how can we harmonize the strategy? How can we take this to funders and really show this vision of an ecosystem rather than of individual players and individual nodes in this web of data sharers? And really also look at how can we get the ecosystem funded and not just all these different individual groups. So yeah, this is a little bit what we're working on and thinking about. And yeah, anyone who has questions, really happy to hear it.
So thank you very much, Laureen. No slides, but again, a lot of information and insightful points for discussion. I think you touched upon some of the challenges that digital commoning initiatives are called to ask. I would like to invite all the speakers to switch on their camera because we can have some more interactive time now, hopefully. So I've been trying to take notes and follow up on some of the chats, messages. I think, first of all, I have to thank all of you from the panel to the expert keynote speaker, Gemma, really for having taken this time here to share some important insights in some of the key initiatives that are pioneering a new approach and a new way of dealing. Gemma, please come back with us. I saw you coming up very shortly, but so one of the things, well, we touched upon many things, and Paul mentioned an important aspect which I think cannot be, and here I will be a little bit provocative, Paul, it cannot be, we cannot wait until the next MFF, the multi-financial framework, for creating the right infrastructure. I think it's true that this framework is very much driven by policy efforts, but there are a lot of also very concrete initiatives at the level of infrastructures. And so here, because you are very active in the community, what are the seeds or what are the concrete initiatives that you are aware of, if any, that could represent, besides the ones we have heard today, of course, that could represent a very, very good example in this direction?
So it's directed to me, right? So
yes, Paul.
First of all, if anybody understood this thing that I was arguing to wait till 2027 for doing anything, that's obviously not what I intended to say. And I think, like, I mean, we've had a, like, I think everything that I'm aware of was mentioned in one of the presentations. Like, I think the big other thing that's not directly represented here is, I think, the initiative in Germany with a sovereign tech fund that is supported by the Ministry of Economic Affairs there, which is very important and which shows that member states are willing to step up. I think, like, there were also signals from, in my understanding, from the French government parts that were pushing for this working group to also see if this can be transformed relatively quickly into, via a one-stop shop, into I think their sort of stated objective is a European foundation for the digital commons. So we see all these initiatives, right? And I think that's been developing fairly rapidly. Like, I think that I share maybe sort of, I think Melanie hinted a little bit to this. This has been a discourse that has been along for a very long time, and it's been something that academics and activists have been pushing sort of in the shadows, and that but with relatively limited attention to these mechanisms. And they've really, through this highlight that maybe the European working team has put on it, have really come to the attention and got much more attention that they deserve. And I think we also have these examples, WikiRate, Wikimedia Foundation, Mozilla, lots of other projects that have demonstrated some for a decade or more the viability of these things. And I think we're in a position where there's increasing understanding that this is something we need to leverage. This is something that is suited to kind of like this more public-spirited, public interest-driven way of European policymaking, and we see a connection here. And I would just point to a number of instruments that are available, right? Like, we have the multi-country projects under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where member states can. And we see these initiatives in various member states. So I think there is an opportunity for like-minded member states to get together and mobilize some of these resources as support for digital commons in the next couple of years. That can be quicker than waiting for 2027 or even for the next European Commission in 2025.
Thank you, Paul. Indeed, I think, sorry here if I'm maybe too, but sometimes when it comes to politics, it means that many things have already happened. And I think this is the case in Europe. We have seen and much more has been done. But I think it's also when the politics and the politicians and the regulators come to on stage, it's really possible to overcome some of the fragmentation issues that are indeed intrinsic in this very diverse scenario. Laureen mentioned, in fact, a couple of times the problem of interoperability. Nele also talked about several of the projects in which indeed this is a key requirement. So there are a number of de facto, let's say, standardization or regulatory efforts coming from grassroots initiatives. How can we compensate the gap between grassroots initiatives and top-down sovereignty policies? If I may ask this question to Laureen.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really tough question. And I was just talking to a number of our partners here the other day about this idea that there are so many initiatives that we've seen over the years about standardization and, and another standard of how it's going to work or what it is that we just need to align on, and then it's all going to be interoperable. And I think one of the hard parts is that it's been good to see over the last years the increased political will at a high level for this interoperability and open data ecosystem. But at the same time, what we need with tech, as you often see, the more ambition you have, the smaller you need to start. So you actually really need that grassroots approach to start to have maybe just 5 groups that are interoperable, and then see what works and what doesn't work and how you can improve it and how can you make it easier for another 5 to connect and go and kind of grow like that organically. So I would say I'm definitely leaning more on the grassroots side of it to make it a reality, but we should definitely ground our thinking in all of the kind of top-down strategies and standards and all the thinking and research that has already been done. It's open source, digital commons, it's all about efficient use of resources. So let's not try and reinvent the wheel every single time.
Thank you, Laureen. I think this leads me to Kasia and several of the initiatives that the Mozilla Foundation has been pushing forward, because indeed a lot of these efforts have been, as also Kasia introduced at the very beginning when she presented the Firefox and these nice prints out from the newspaper in 2004. So how can we try to marry the logic, the corporate logic, with the logic of digital commons? So how can these logics can somehow coexist or somehow be harmonized from your experience, Kasia?
That's a very interesting question. Something in me says that we can't marry these logics. I mean, there are completely different mechanisms on the market, and I think that's okay to have the space both for venture capital and commercial entities, and more for digital commons that are more non-profit, non-commercial driven, putting the community and individual interests above profits. Both should be there, but they shouldn't. One shouldn't suppress the other, and that's what's happening right now, right? With the big tech, with the VC and so on, there's complete power imbalance. And I think investors will always look at the return of investment. And in terms of, I don't know, either this is a data co-op or digital commons or data commons, these are very long evolving projects that need a long-term investment, and that investment comes from the European Union or from governments for funding. It's not a space where there will be like flashy headlines and quick wins. It needs like a longer investment and waiting for the payoff to come at some point later on, because it's just not the same. It's just not the same logic. So I wouldn't have much hope that suddenly VC investors will start investing unless they see clearly a profit arising somewhere there. What we know is that a lot of Google people in their free time, they contribute to open source software components, well, because they clearly profits them, but because it's already established somewhere there. So that's another partly healthy, partly unhealthy dynamic. But I think that's the that's the dynamic out there. I mean, the other, I think, aspect that maybe we should name here is that the kind of projects we're talking about here, they don't have a clear business model, right? So at some point, they will just need more and more funding until they come out with some business model once they establish. But in order to get out of to get to some kind of level of effectiveness, they need funding. And I think this is the role of the funding coming from the government side. Of grants, our organization, right, Mozilla, we also have the grant making for experimentations, but I think we've seen many examples also in Germany here with the where for example the prototype fund, something is being developed, but we need the pipeline of funding to so they don't fall off the edge, but that keep
Sure.
developing.
And thank you, Kasia. This leads me to the public funding, to the funding strategy. And here Gemma presented a little bit what is the strategy of the European Commission and how the Commission is now coming towards, closer to these communities with specific goals. Gemma, would you like to add something specific here about, the funding model and the funding approach for this kind of communities?
Thank you very much, Monique. First of all, as many said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is a topic which is alive since 20 years or more, indeed. What I would fully concur with you is that if there is a momentum where there is an intention from several sides and there is attention towards the topic from those who can trigger the investment and coordinate an integrated strategy at both at the EU level or even coordinated initiatives that are happening at the global level, then it's a momentum to size. It's a moment to size. It's an opportunity to size. And this goes beyond any definition or etiquette that we may put to the topic today. Regarding the funding, very quickly, I presented what's on the plate for the next generation internet, which, as I said, funds the Internet Commons. So there is funding, a portfolio of subjects to be addressed under the new work program. We have 40 million in total. And the bottom line is that we will continue funding open source projects with a more specific strategy. I mentioned it earlier. We structure, we pilot, we support the policy on digital commons as well. But regarding the funding model, so one of the key features of NGI is that we, as the European Commission, not being sufficiently close to all the wealthy of grassroots initiatives that are on the ground, and also to the ecosystem of open source innovators, we use intermediary projects that help us, whose task is precisely to identify those who are best at solving the issues that are on the table, being on the increasing the privacy, the security, being in the supporting data portability. I've seen there was one question regarding whether we will have more of such initiatives. This remains a key topic for us, and also at developing solution in the field which is more and more flourishing, which is the open hardware. So in a way, the topics we are working on are not going to change. This corresponds to the NGI vision, and the working model is going to be the same. But we are having, I would say, what we hope is a more strategic and focused approach in the next work program.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Here, I would like to ask Melanie, because she comes from for me, it's not so much the academic perspective, but it's really your more low background and your approach to some of your, thinking about some of your work. Clearly, also in terms of regulatory and policy-driven efforts, there is still a lot of fragmentation in Europe. And the fact that within the EU presidency from France, there was a wide promotion of these concepts. How do you think this can help in overcoming this fragmentation, and in which way you see academic efforts being able to inject into more policy and research-driven aspect, into policy and regulatory aspects?
Thank you so much, Monique. That's a very broad and ambitious question. And I was trying, when listening to the co-panelist discussion, to think exactly about how both policy and law can help to better overcome the hurdles which have been identified. And when Paul replied to your first question, I was exactly thinking about the momentum, as Gemma, you use that exact word. We have a momentum with now high-level support. I speak like I am representing the digital commons, you understood. And if there is to be a fund or a foundation, I think the good way to govern it would be to have the actors themselves on board, bringing some representation, some diversity. So the actors of the various fields and case studies of the digital common needs to sit at the table. And like Kasia, you were mentioning maybe the difficulties of the business models, and I think today I'm a bit more optimistic in the feasibility of public-private commons partnerships. Maybe I'll change my mind tomorrow, but I suspect that in the field of data trusts or connected cities or data commons, like it has been mentioned already, there is a private need to access and share the digital data. And if there would be a legal reform so that private partner cannot impose through private terms of use the automatic sharing without commons-based conditions. So if there would be this little big step to bring back power and governments in the hands of the users, of the citizens, that could be a possible legal way to advance the digital commons.
Sorry, thank you, Melanie. This gives me an assist to move to Nele, because actually I think we've heard today quite a few examples of how successful the Estonian government has been in trying to embrace and promote a number of initiatives that engage citizens in the first place. Nele, what do you think are the critical elements? I mean, Estonia has a particular, physiognomy as a country, and possibly it's not always easy to replicate this for other countries in Europe. But what do you think are the critical aspects that governments should keep high in their agenda in order to really succeed in this open digitalization, embracing also citizens and engaging them?
Thank you. I feel I'm under a lot of pressure, but perhaps I would like to come back to what we have been thinking here in Estonia, or what we think is something that has stopped actually us moving further with what we have been discussing here. And I would bring out two things. One is what I was referring to before, what made it rather easy in the 90s, that we really wanted to become the democratic sharing state and so forth. But actually over time, we have also some of our institutionalized processes, and public sector has grown a bit, and I would say that that it's not having the same mindset or the drive that it had in the 90s. So, and I do not have actually a good remedy for this, even though generally there is still a lot of good positive energy around government openness and how government operates. But the second actually is very practical, and this is related, and I'm talking now about public sector, and I apologize for all the civic people in this room. It's actually how the government is used to functioning and ordering the services it needs, the information systems it needs. They are becoming increasingly actually larger. So I would say that the government is also getting a bit more comfortable, and this is partly related to the fact that government does not possess all the knowledge. Government may not have data scientists, government may not have service re-engineering and service designers and so forth. So they are actually used to outsourcing these things, which means they are heavily reliant on the outside partners, and in this sense have gotten more comfortable. And I don't know whether you have followed tendering process in your countries, but they are rather big. So this is actually related really to how we tender. And perhaps digital commons and digital public infrastructure, digital public goods movement may have an opportunity here that we really move more towards very small tenders, so or then the different, let's say, different solutions, combination-based development of digitalization. But these are rather big changes. So we are trying here actually to break our tenders into very different or smaller pieces, and having, I would say, very practical digitalization issues on our table also.
Thank you very much, Nele. Since we are almost getting to an end, I would have liked to ask many other questions to each of you. So I guess we have to do a follow-up session. Actually, I've seen a lot of comments from people, saying we should do more of these discussions, engaging also them. Of course, thanks a lot for sharing links and comments. It would be great to give the opportunity to all to talk, but I would like in the closing to give the floor to each of the speakers for a short sentence, for a short closing comment, short please, on what do you think, and here of course in one word would be the core priority to support more of digital commons initiatives, also in view of supporting the next generation internet vision, that is an internet that is more human-centric. And I would start with our gentleman, our only panelist, Paul. Paul, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, that's a hard question. Like just one thing. I think there's maybe two things which are important to really. I think we're seeing like all of this momentum in different places across Europe, and like none of these things are specific to nation states. None of these things are very small, and the more we pool our resources and our efforts, the more powerful we will be. I think Nele also hinted to this, that many of the problems we're trying to address are not individual nation state problems. Like we're trying to build a public digital space that is European or even global in nature, and I think we should scale up our efforts. And I'm very happy that we're seeing, for example, I've always perceived discussions in Europe being like a little bit split in sort of like a Nordic Northwestern discussion and then a French Southern European thing. And I think like having people from both sides of these discussions around the table and being able to build something truly European is it will bring us much further.
Thank you. Kasia?
Very short. I think you need to understand what the needs of our communities are, because it's about bottom up, and then enable instead of create and then embrace the chaotic nature of it. Because it is chaotic beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Laureen?
Yeah, maybe I would pick up on a few things I think that were being hinted at the end by different panelists. And I think there's the interesting tension with the funding here is that this is infrastructure, right? So you need to think long-term funding, you need a lot of resources, tech is expensive. And at the same time, we're saying we need to start small, we need to come grassroots. And so with public funding, long-term big budgets, you're looking at a lot of administration, which is often not very feasible for small grassroots initiatives. And so you get this idea of like smaller projects, smaller bits and pieces. And I already was on about it in the chat for a little bit that NLNet has been a really positive experience for us, where it's small amounts for very concrete things that are helping this bigger shift happen, right? But there, I would say the one barrier or like pitfall we have together is the findability. With infrastructure that's in the physical space, you can see, oh, we need to cross this river, we're going to build a bridge, and you're not going to get another bridge right next to it, right? In digital space, it's a lot harder. So we need to really tackle that findability question. I'm sure there's people on the call today who didn't know about WikiRate. That's the challenge, right? We need to make it easier to show ourselves and to make sure we don't actually replicate each other's work. Just because, and that would also address some of the questions and things we saw in the chat around funding and the efficiency of it and things going down the drain, which is nobody's intention, of course. We're all trying to achieve the same thing. So yeah, I would just kind of leave with that. Let's work on our findability together.
Thank you, Laureen. I would like to give the floor to Melanie.
Thank you. I would like to make two contributions. So the first would be to put an emphasis on commons-based governance of whatever process, funds, infrastructure, design, etc., in order to avoid commons washing and also to avoid co-optation, because we already saw that happening. And also, it was just, we mentioned so the role of Europe in the world, maybe an alliance with partners and concepts of the global south would be beneficiary, so as to avoid a third hurdle, which would be data colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are really running out of time, but in order to conclude, I would like to thank all of you and to give the word to Gemma for a closing statement on the Commission side. And to remind all of you guys out there, please continue to follow NGI.eu because we keep on updating, providing information and sharing it. So for sure, it's not the last time we talk about digital commons or internet commons, and more will come up soon. Gemma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monique. What can I say? I took note. I think the panelists have mentioned everything. So from even geopolitical considerations, which I heard in the last intervention from Melanie, in the need to reconcile the top down with the bottom up, because with none of the two, you go very far. So this is precisely what we are trying to do, to reconcile the strategic long-term sustainable approach with getting what's coming up from the grassroots projects. And this is really what we want to nurture for the future. And how we can try to do that, this is what I gather also. We need to match opportunities with the needs. So the first exercise we are launching ourselves is into finding the communities, even those that are not incredibly visible, and to map the needs with the resources so that we can move towards more sustainable projects. Thank you very much, and please be in touch with us so that we can continue this journey.
Thank you, and bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nele. Thank you so much. Bye.